Hi guys and welcome back. In this video we're going to talk about tuples. Tuples are very similar to lists in that they are used to store multiple pieces of information. But there is a small subtle difference between tuples and lists. Let's jump right in. A tuple can be defined like this. Let's imagine you've got a short tuple that contains two of your friend names. You can just say Rolf, Bob. Notice that there are no square brackets now around these two strings, but there is a comma in between them. So you've got one string and then another string. This is a tuple. You can think of it as almost the same thing as a list, but I'll show you the difference in just a moment. It's often good form to put brackets around this. So this is a bit clearer. If you put brackets around the two strings like that, this is a little bit clearer that it's a tuple. And almost all of the time you're going to see tuples defined with the brackets around them. But remember that the brackets are not required in many cases, although there are some cases where they will be. And that is when Python cannot be sure if the comma is used to separate two things inside a tuple or something else. For example, here's an occasion where you will need to use the brackets, which is when you want to put a tuple inside a list. If you have a list and you want to put a tuple inside it, and you do it like this, you have not put a tuple inside the list. What you've done is you've created a list of two elements, as we saw in the last video. If you want to create a list with a tuple inside it, you will need the brackets, so that Python knows that you intend this to evaluate first, which creates a tuple, and then the list to evaluate later. That's what brackets are normally used for in mathematics as well, to signal order of evaluation. So, most of the time you're going to see your tuples defined with brackets around them, and I would encourage you to get accustomed to that notation as well. Something very important is that while you can write your tuples like this thing is most definitely not a tuple, if you just write Rolf. If you write Rolf on its own, that's just a string, right? But if you add Rolf and then a comma, Python knows that you want a tuple there. And this, adding a comma at the end, is something that a lot of my students make as a mistake when they're starting up. They just put a comma at the end because, maybe they come from a different programming language, or maybe it's a typo or a small mistake, and this can cause some trouble. So make sure to not put commas at the end of your statements in Python, because that turns strings or anything else into tuples, and that can be a bit confusing. So I've got this tuple here with my friend names, Rolf, Bob, and Anne, and let's say I want to add something to this tuple. Like we learned with lists, friends.append, and then gen. So if we run this now, you'll see that we'll get an error. And it says, attribute error, this is the name of the error, tuple object has no attribute append. And here it tells you the line in which the error occurred, which is line 2 of our code. What this means is that you can't do .append on a tuple. Okay, so how do you add to a tuple if you can't append to it? Well, that's the thing. You cannot add to a tuple. Here we've got a tuple of 3 elements, and you cannot insert an extra element on this tuple. All you can do is say friends equal friends plus gen, like that. So you can add 2 tuples together, in this case the friends tuple and the gen tuple with a single element, add those two and say that friends is now equal to the result of adding them. Remember, when you do an equal sign, the right side evaluates first. So this thing here uses the current value of friends and this new tuple, and then you give it the name friends. So you can reassign while using a variable in the assignment. That's totally fine. It just uses the last value of the variable if it existed. You can do this if you want, and that will result in a tuple of 4 elements. But what's important, and an important distinction, is that the tuple itself did not change. You created a new one which contains now 4 elements. And while that's relatively unimportant right now, it will become important as you learn more Python. So that is the key difference between lists and tuples. Lists, you can add and remove elements. Tuples, you cannot. So that's the key difference. Tuples are useful for when you want to keep them unchanged. Most of the time, I'd recommend using tuples over lists, and only use lists when you specifically want to allow modification or changes. Again, at the moment this may not make much sense, but you will find more meaning in that as you learn more. Trust me on that one. That's everything for this video though. We've learned about tuples. I'll see you on the next one.